Fearless Farmers is where we use the curriculum from Hills and Milk and Honey to teach on regenerative farms that are hopefully near you. And on those farms will be homeschool programs, workshops, field trips, classes for mostly kids, but adults too. And then in addition to that, Hills and Milk and Honey also publishes online curriculum.
Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm Mira Rubin, your host, and I am thrilled to introduce you today to Amy Milliron. Amy is the founder of Fearless Farmers. And Fearless Farmers is a Texas-based nonprofit that partners with holistic-minded farmers and ranchers to teach regenerative agriculture as a path to reversing climate change and to educate people about the direct link between the health of our soil and human health. Amy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
This is really exciting because you're an educator, and I was an educator for 18 years, and not with the traditional training, but teaching people software. And here you are as an educator, taking your skills as an educator to educate kids about regenerative farming.
Right.
Awesome, brilliant, wonderful. And we have so much to talk about. I do want to ask you to start out by sharing with folks, what is regenerative agriculture?
The most basic way to explain regenerative agriculture is that it's a way to farm the land that uses nature as our guide, that honors ecosystems that are already in place, that focuses on biodiversity. We don't want to add any toxic chemicals to the land. We don't want to till the land. And ultimately, we want the soil to be really healthy because soil is where human health begins. So anything that we can do that supports soil health then in turn provides nutrient-dense food for the humans. There's so much more to it than that, but that's the basic understanding.
Well, lots of us have heard about permaculture, and now the new trend is toward regenerative agriculture. So would you say is one a subset of the other in any way, just to clarify it for folks that might have some confusion?
That's a good question. So permaculture really is a design methodology. So if you were to have a piece of land and you wanted to be able to farm on that land, you would put permaculture practices into place that would, again, honor the ecosystems and the layout of the land while also incorporating the human component into it. So regenerative agriculture, I think of as more of an umbrella, and permaculture is one aspect of it, because regenerative agriculture involves lots of things, rotational grazing of animals and crops, which there's a lot of overlap with permaculture as well, but they go well together. That's pretty much it.
Perfect. So you came to create Fearless Farmers from a path of being a farmer, right? And you came to being a farmer through a path of inspiration. Yes?
Yes.
So maybe you could just sort of share that journey with us so people know where you've come from, and maybe they can see a possibility of themselves becoming farmers as well.
Well, it comes from a few different places. So one, growing up, I lived in the city. We visited my grandfather and grandmother and extended family that lived a little bit out in the country quite often. So I had a little bit of exposure to chickens and cows and different animals. And I always had this desire to have a farm, that idea of homesteading and being able to, maybe not necessarily at that time was I thinking about living off the grid, but I just knew that I wanted to be able to sustain life within our family and have it be a little bit more under my own control and not be so dependent upon other things like going to the store as much and things like that. Even as a little kid, I understood that, but I also had this deep desire to teach. So as I grew up and then became a teacher and became a mom, um, we still lived in the city and the opportunities just weren't quite there. And there were just always these dreams, my husband and I, and we would take the kids, we'd go on drives out into the country and think, oh, someday maybe we'll have a second home, or maybe we'll be able to retire on land. And at the time we were living in Arizona. And when I had my second child, he was very little at the time that we had a life-changing experience happen to us. I had taken our family to a public pool, and a lifeguard approached me and asked me to breastfeed my child the next time I needed to feed him in the restroom. The lifeguard had approached me after I had been nursing him under a towel, took him out, was burping him, and the lifeguard came up and said, our policy is that we ask you to use the restroom. I was really caught off guard. I had breastfed my daughter leading up to that when she was younger with no problem. So it really caught me off guard that this lifeguard said anything to me. And I said to him, do you eat your lunch in the restroom? It just sort of
Not the most hygienic place to eat lunch.
And so I ended up questioning the aquatics director at the pool, and they confirmed that that was the case. We left. I questioned the aquatic director over the entire city aquatics program. They confirmed that that was the case. I ended up going and speaking at a city council meeting. I had shared with a few friends ahead of time that I was going to go because I just wanted to find out why this would ever happen to a mom. And it ended up being standing room only of breastfeeding moms and families with an overflow room. And the media was there, and it was incredible. And it was this beautiful choreographed scene that really wasn't choreographed. I didn't know any of these moms ahead of time. When you speak, you get 3 minutes each. And so that's not enough time to tell your story. So we each ended up telling why it's so important that moms be left to feed their babies. And the underlying theme is, there is nothing that replaces that initial food source of breast milk. And I understand that sometimes there are things that make you choose otherwise or need to choose otherwise, and I completely support that. But there is something about that initial intestinal microbiome that's set up by breastfeeding that is, if we can, we should be supporting moms to be able to do that if they choose to for their babies. And after that whole experience at that one city, I ended up going to multiple cities within the state and was able to get laws changed actually in 4 different cities. And then a group of 12 of us moms led the state in an effort to write the law in Arizona to protect breastfeeding moms. And that was a huge accomplishment, one that I never thought would happen, didn't have the experience ahead of time for, but was really grateful for. And I just kept thinking after it was done, okay, so we did that. That's great. Now moms can hopefully breastfeed without being worried.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because we started out talking about regenerative agriculture, and now we're talking about breastfeeding, and people might wonder, where is this going?
Right,
So
okay.
maybe you could, it really does tie in. So hang in there and you're going to hear how this connects back. So go for it.
So what I wanted to do is be able to help people understand why nutrient dense food at the end of the breastfeeding relationship is just as important as that initial food source of breast milk. And even back then I thought, gosh, we have to do something about this, because my research is showing that a lot of the food that we're eating maybe, is filled with toxic chemicals that I don't want to put into my young child's mouth. And I wanted to be able to do something about that. I was raising young kids at the time, had to kind of put pause on the long-term plan, but an opportunity presented itself later when we moved to Texas for me to be able to start an educational farm living in Central Texas. And I went out and got as much training as I could, learning everything I could about regenerative agriculture through holistic management, through internships, through sustainability programs, through volunteering on regenerative farms. in exchange for just some education, and read everything I possibly could so that I could learn how to then turn around and teach other people how to do that. So that was the next.
Beautiful. And just like there's one little piece too is breast milk concentrates whatever the chemicals are that are in your body too, right? So the health of our soil and our food supply is directly impacting the health of the breast milk, correct?
Again, some things do pass through breast milk. Not everything does, but some things do, and we just do need to be. I would want to be careful as a mom to make sure that what I was eating was beneficial for my baby. So
Yeah.
I feel like the two link up very well, and it felt like a natural transition for our family. And it helped me be very aware of the practices that we put into place on our farm at the time. So,
Well, another thing that you did, which is monumental, is you were on a mission and you got laws changed. And you said you and 12 other moms that were when I stopped you, but it changed policy. Continue, just finish that sentence out so people know how much of an impact one person with a passion can make.
well, I think of myself as just the same as anybody else. I actually didn't quite remember how a law is made. I had to kind of go back and read or watch silly Schoolhouse Rock videos of a bill is just a bill, which isn't even totally accurate, but and learn how to do the process. But I also ended up with a lot of mentors along the way, some incredible legislators, bipartisan, by the way, came along and helped put that forward. I feel sad that those days feel like they weren't that long ago. It was only 15 years ago, but I just don't know that we could even do anything like that today. That's another aspect to it, but it's one that I want to encourage children in the next generation to learn how to be advocates, because there is something incredibly powerful about being able to stand up for what you believe in. And we had an event from the breastfeeding legislation situation where we organized a picnic on the Capitol and invited moms from all over the state, and we taught them how to log into the system and be able to have their voice heard, and most of them didn't even know that you could do that. So there was a big shift, and it wasn't just the breastfeeding legislation. People from that point forward understood how they could take part in the system. So that was a neat outcome.
You being an educator at every position in
Yeah, so
whatever you're doing, I love it. And actually this is more important now than ever,
mhm.
because who knows what's going to happen as a result of this virus. You know, there's a potential for wonderful and not so wonderful things to come out of it, and we do want to be alert to our ability to um, shape legislation
Mhm.
and shape our futures collectively.
There's a lot that we can do, and a lot of the curriculum that I write incorporates points in which families and even children can take part in the process. And when that becomes a norm, just like if regenerative agriculture becomes the normal way that we raise food, then that's when everything comes into alignment better. And so that's an important aspect of the curriculum.
So one of the things that you're talking about is having kids be advocates. And I think as we look at what's happening in the world, some of our greatest advocates right now are kids. And they have a voice that is heard above the throng of everything. And that's a wonderful gift. So cultivating people to a new norm that is a healthy norm so that they can challenge the existing system, that's a really exciting prospect to me.
I agree.
And now you're educating kids, you're creating curriculum for kids of all ages.
Right.
So talk about that. For instance, you came from the city. So many of us live in city environments. How can these folks have access to really learning about regenerative farming?
It is a mouthful of a phrase, but it's a really important one. And so when I talk about regenerative agriculture, I try to encourage people. I'm not teaching necessarily everyone to become a regenerative farmer. I'm teaching people to understand why regenerative agriculture is really important. Maybe coming from that, we will have farmers that emerge. And I hope so, because we have a huge statistic that's not so grand, and that's that for every 6 farmers over 65, we only have 1 under 35 poised and ready to take their place. We need to be training up and growing new farmers. There are a lot of young farmers that are ready to go, but that's a whole nother issue of not having access to land and all of that. So that's another advocacy, tangent that we could go on another day. But when we talk about regenerative agriculture with children and the curriculum that I write, it's teaching them the basics of regenerative farming and knowing how to support your local community. So if you have regenerative farmers in your community, and they could use your support not only in buying directly from them or buying from their farmers markets that they attend, or volunteering, or telling other people about them, or voting with your dollars, so that way the money goes directly to the farmers as opposed to so many in-between entities. Or maybe it's that you're voting in general or just people who support regenerative farming. There's so many different ways that we can support regenerative farmers. And so the curriculum I write gives practical things like how to raise chickens and how to grow food and how to store and like dehydrate and can food, and some of the homesteading things that are really interesting and fun to do that we really should get back to. But it's really a holistic approach. It teaches why we have to look at it as a whole, not just each individual part.
So how can folks get hold of your curriculum? How can they benefit from what you're putting together?
So my original farm was called Hills of Milk and Honey, and we had goats and bees and several other animals, and we had crops. And we were actually on some land that needed to have some healing done. And so when I talk about that, it just means that in some places the soil wasn't quite ready for us to grow anything in it yet. And so we needed to use cover crops and compost tea and lots of different things to help get it up to standard. And we were in the process of doing that. And we had some changes that needed to be made, and we needed to move. And so at the time, I thought, well, let's see what we're going to do with Hills of Milk and Honey. I decided to turn it into a different business of distributing the curriculum. So I write everything under Hills of Milk and Honey. And then Fearless Farmers is a nonprofit that was born out of this whole concept. So the reason why I bring them both up is because Fearless Farmers is where we use the curriculum from Hills of Milk and Honey to teach on regenerative farms that are hopefully near you. We're starting in Central Texas. We're partnering with regenerative farms in Central Texas. And on those farms will be homeschool programs, workshops, field trips, classes for mostly kids, but adults too. And then in addition to that, Hills of Milk and Honey also publishes online curriculum. And that's where we come back to your previous question of what if you live in the city? How can you learn? And so there are online only classes where we try to bring it to life as much as possible through Zoom calls and recordings and visiting other farms and being able to show people what you can do. Most of the curriculum is actually, even though it's provided online, the activities aren't online activities. You are being asked to get in your kitchen, to go outside. When COVID pandemic is over, it will be, go beyond your yard or your immediate surroundings and ultimately get involved with your community. So it's very interactive.
Beautiful. So can you give us a URL or something that people can find you?
So fearlessfarmers.org is the nonprofit, and hillsofmilkandhoney.com is to get the online courses and the curriculum directly.
Hi, this is Scott, co-founder of Sustainability Now. I wanted to remind you that resources and links related to this episode can be found on our website, sustainabilitynow.global. While you're there, consider signing up for a monthly membership to help us keep the show going. This year, we will be adding live events, long-form reporting, and interactive content. We started Sustainability Now as a passion project, and until this point, we've been completely self-funded. Your contribution will ensure that we can continue to build community, inspire hope, and share solutions. Thanks, and remember that together we can shape a world that works.
Oh, I wanted to talk about the importance of soil health, because people listening to this might think it's just about farming. And there's so many issues to consider here is the quality of our food, the availability of our food, the local network for that we get our food, but also whether we're talking about food or not, talking about soil health as it relates to climate change and our health as human beings, I think is a really important topic, so that people understand this is not just about farming at all.
Right. It isn't. And there's a few points to consider here. One is, I have this thought that I can't understand my time that I'm living in history. When I look at how even my grandparents took care of the soil and the land, why in the world did we ever get to a point where we were adding unnatural components to the soil?
Poison.
What's that?
Poison.
Right. And why did we think that that was okay? And then why do we not question it? And that confuses me to this day. And I think that what I would like to do is be able to encourage people to look at that history and want to question it also, and understand that the solution is there. So for instance, Dr. Zach Bush, very well known for all of his work to link up soil health with human health. I'm
going to interrupt you for 1 second so that everybody knows we've done a wonderful interview with Dr. Zach. It is posted on the sustainabilitynow.global website. Please check it out. He's an exceptionally brilliant man who has made all kinds of connections that I don't believe other people have made before.
Right. I agree. And his work is phenomenal. People are starting to understand. They're starting to get it. I have a personal experience. He talks a lot about just the balance of micronutrients in your body. And I had about 14 years ago or so, I had a situation where I had a surgery. I ended up in pain waking up from that surgery. There was nerve damage that they couldn't figure out the exact cause of. And I went through 10 years of endless amounts of trials of different surgeries and different medications and lots of experimental things to try to fix it. When the 10 years went by, and I really feel like I lost that 10 years of my life, I was in so much pain. We ended up moving to Texas coincidentally around that time, and I saw a new doctor, and she looked at me, and it was a neurologist, and she said, you know, you don't actually need me, but I'm going to help you. And she sent me to a nutritionist, and they did some panels on micronutrients, and they checked, and lots of stuff was out of balance. And so when they got me back on supplements that helped balance everything out, my pain went away. That was 10 years of misery that could have been solved by a nutritionist coming on board and doing one simple blood test and helping me get on supplements that helped. Now I use whole foods.
And it would have saved you from all those surgeries and
right. And now I know, and I still work with a nutritionist to stay on top of what foods will help continue to help me feel good. And, you know, whole foods are obviously the way to go. I am very careful about where I source my food from. And I think it's really important that it comes from organic sources as much as possible. When I'm talking about meats, our family does eat meat, then I want to support regenerative farmers that put their animals on pasture, that don't feed them feed that maybe I wouldn't want to eat. We have to think about that. When we're eating meat, then we're eating whatever the animal is eating. And so I ask lots of questions and source my food from places where people can trust. And when I talk about the soil health, that matters to the animals too. It's not just for the crops that are grown, because they're eating whatever's coming out of that soil. So it goes all the way down to that micronutrient level in us, but that micro level in general, even under our feet, is really important.
One of the things that we're talking about when we talk about soil health is the microbiome of the soil. Right. All these little bacteria and fungi and other life forms that are residing underneath the soil that help to keep the soil from eroding, and that also help to make it a sponge to be able to collect the water that comes from the sky so that it replenishes the underground aquifers. And what's that there's a looming water crisis, partly because of our abuse of the soil, and the soil cannot absorb that water. So it's a much, much, much bigger picture than what people would think of when they think of a farm.
Right, it is. And Alan Savory's work has really led the way with a lot of this with holistic management. We cannot have bare soil. We need to cover it. And the best way to do that is put roots in the ground. And the best thing about that is the photosynthesis that occurs is drawing down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and pulling it down into the ground, where it not only is better to have it in that place anyway, but also it's helping all of those micronutrients receive the food that it needs to be able to turn around and feed the roots to be able to give us food to eat. The cycle's amazing. I don't understand why we disrupt it, because nature knows exactly what it needs to do. So it's confusing, like I said, that we disrupt that so much when the solution is right in front of us.
Well,
So
it's driven by money. I mean, that's how it ended up getting so disrupted, is because certain companies saw an opportunity, and people were trying to optimize production. So did monoculture planting, and that brought disease, which created a problem that chemicals people saw the opportunity for chemicals to solve. I mean, it works out to me to a fundamental notion of imagining that we're in a mechanistic universe instead of a holistic universe.
right. And you know what? Kids don't understand that. When you look at kids and you say, here's the best way for us to take care of the soil, and this is how it takes care of us. And then you explain, this isn't actually how we normally do things. This is why we're learning how to do this. The kids will say, why aren't we doing it like that then?
Exactly.
And it's very interesting trying to explain to children why we aren't. And so I want them to have hope, because this should be a hopeful situation. There are so many jobs on the horizon that will help connect children as they grow into these fields, literally fields, that will help them be part of the new normal, of being part of the regeneration movement, we call it. This is something that is exciting, and I hope that kids and families take part so that they can find their niche in it all.
Well, the other thing is that, I mean, the notion of regeneration is such a beautiful and hopeful truth that we've started doing Sustainability Now hangout nights, movie nights. And we recently showed the movie The Biggest Little Farm, which started out showing dead soil, just lumps of dirt and lumps of dead dirt. And at the end, it was this rich oasis of life. And the soil was healthy, plants were healthy, people were healthy. And it's quite remarkable to see how quickly, when we stop destroying, how quickly the earth will regenerate with some love and care.
Right. It is amazing to see that, and it's encouraging to think that families can, maybe in their own little plot of land, it doesn't even take much, really. They could take soil that's not so great, stick it in a pot, add a little bit of compost, grow something. Notice that maybe it might need a little bit more help. Maybe they learn how to make compost tea. They add compost tea on a regular basis, and they watch the soil transform, and they watch that one plant in that one pot become really healthy. So when you talk about how can people in the city maybe take part or see the change, it can be as simple as that. But I think that when people start to see that and they realize, what if farmers are doing this on a massive scale? Then this means that this is the type of food that we get to eat. And it's also helping reverse climate change. Paul Hawkins' work with Drawdown has been incredible. And I learned of him in visiting Bioneers. If people haven't checked out Bioneers, they should. They have a conference every year. And this is a place where I feel like all of the solutions-oriented people meet. When we think about climate change, we think of, Terry Tempest Williams, and we think about Wendell Berry, and we think about even Elaine Ingram with all of her soil work. And these are names that I feel like should be household names. And
Yeah.
I want to help people learn who these people are.
Well, we're going to list them on our website at sustainabilitynow.global, because this is all about sharing resources. This is all about everybody becoming active in this necessary transformation of our planet. The thing that people need to know when we think about climate change, up until I started understanding more about regenerative agriculture, for one, I felt rather hopeless. And when we feel hopeless, we don't tend to look at what's there. We want to pretend that it doesn't exist instead, and that there's nothing I can do, so I'm not going to think about it. And what we're finding is that there are really powerful and hopeful things we can do.
There are.
And you're spearheading that. You're at the forefront of that with the education. Are you aware of anybody else that's doing education for kids with regenerative agriculture?
Yes, there are people who are doing what they can with what they have. It's an interesting situation to be in. I think that the best investment that someone can make is in educating the next generation, whether that's regenerative farming or anything else. And that tends to not necessarily always be where people want to put their money. And so I would encourage people who are interested in helping see a change, them looking for ways locally or nationally or even globally that they can support financially organizations that are looking to educate. So this could be everything from a small farm doing like what I was doing, and certainly there are farms that were doing like what I did on my farm. Whether there is somebody that's trying to put together a more massive scale like what I'm hoping to be able to do so that it becomes more readily available, I'm at the point where I'm talking to people from all over the world saying, I have been looking for something like this, something that we can implement with children. My goal is our children have to grow up knowing that regenerative agriculture is the norm. So anything that I can do that can be a part of that, I'm on board. And I hope that I can build a community of people that feel the same way, and we collectively can pull all of our strengths and finances together to be able to kind of move this ship. And we don't have a lot of time.
No.
I don't want that to feel scary, and especially when you're talking to kids, but we don't have a lot of time. We need to make changes quickly. And it is possible because we don't have to look for the answers. The answers literally are right in front of us. We just have to make the change.
I think that this is such an opportune moment in this time of COVID-19 where the pace of life as we knew it was disrupted. People are thinking more deeply. People are feeling greater connection to the planet. People are realizing that that we're part of a bigger picture and we're not in our own little isolated pockets. And one of the things I'd like to talk with you about is, how do we get this curriculum into the schools?
So that is something that I am currently working on. And this is a big shift. Right now, most schools either don't have an agricultural program anymore, even if they once did, or if they do, there isn't a really balanced view that's provided to the children, let alone a wholly regenerative view. When I have been talking to schools, they have a very conventional mindset about farming, and they are not willing to listen or make change. And I just invite people to come to the table. There's actually a lot that is overlapped and is very much beneficial. I never want this to feel like it's a tug of war. There's so much to be learned, and there's so much expertise out there about how to farm and how to manage the land. We just got a little askew when we started doing things, in the mid 1900s that kind of threw us off a little bit. And I think that we need to get back to what we know is right. And schools, I hope, will allow this type of program to be introduced in a way to be able to give children the opportunity to see both viewpoints at the very least.
So when you talk about conventional farming, I'm guessing you're talking about chemical farming that incorporates pesticides and fungicides and genetically modified seed and glyphosate and
Right.
yeah. So one of the things that Dr. Zach, we talked about him earlier in this podcast, has been able to identify is a very strong correlation between the decline in human health and the rise of the use of glyphosate. And this is a standard practice throughout our current agricultural systems. And the chemical companies do have vested interests in a number of these agricultural schools. So it's really important for us as citizen activists to be communicating with our institutions the importance and the strength of our desire and requirement that we start instituting practices that are sustainable and regenerative.
Right. There's a pushback that occurs, of course, and a lot of times the argument is, well, we need all of these things in order to be able to feed the world. No, we don't. The yields are there to grow organically and to do things with natural methods that don't involve all of those additives that really haven't been around that long, relatively speaking. We can take them away, and the farmers can still be productive, and they can still make a profit, and we can be exponentially healthier. So I think there's a shift. I am watching the shift happen. It's encouraging. Organic farmers that were once conventional and have now shifted their operations are starting to speak up and tell their neighbors that haven't made the switch yet, hey, you know what, this worked, come let me show you. And it's neat to see. I hope it happens a little bit faster.
Yes. And I think that for people listening to recognize the direct correlation between the health of the soil, the health of the food, the health of the people, the health of the animals, they're not something that we can separate. We cannot prioritize volume over value.
Right.
Yeah.
It is all interconnected, and that's what holistic management and regenerative agriculture takes into account, is that in order to regenerate, then we have to think of the whole picture, and that we can't impact one thing and think that there won't be, a result that maybe might be undesirable somewhere else. So,
and really the call is step up, speak out now.
Mm-hmm.
And persistently.
Right. And this is the time to do it. I have received more phone calls and requests for information and requests for consulting during this time since the pandemic hit, because people are aware and they know that they don't quite know what they should know, and they want to learn. And that is something that I think is not only great for the adults, but then they're going to role model that for their children. And since my heart is, wanting to connect with these kids who really just want to grow up in a world that's still going to be here for them and in a healthy way, then that makes me happy to think that there are parents that think that this is something that's that important that they want to learn and pass down as a legacy to their children.
I think that this pandemic has also brought us to awareness of the absolutely critical importance of local supply streams, because we're actually seeing how fragile our food supply chain is. In fact, I just heard that Wendy's in some of their locations is not serving hamburgers because they don't have access to meat supply. And I've heard that a number of the meat processing facilities have had to close because they have had massive outbreaks. And I think we can look at what kind of correlation there might be there. Like, these environments are not particularly healthy for the people, for the animals, And what's happening is that they are hotbeds of disease.
It is, but there's also another factor going on there, and that's that we don't have enough processing facilities to really handle what we need to do. And I'll give you an example. When we were on our farm, we raised chickens. We rotated them on our pasture. We raised them for us, and we processed them, meaning that we harvested them, and they went from being on our grass to being in our freezer, and they never left our farm. But when people wanted to purchase from us and asked us to please raise more for the community, once we did that, we had to take them to a USDA approved processing facility. And the closest one to us was 2.5 hours away. Now that is a long ways away. In some states, for people, that's like across their state. Texas just feels like a jaunt sometimes. But the thing is, some people they can't even take their animals to be processed in their own state because there aren't enough processing facilities. There are two things there. We either need more, or we need to make sure that farmers are equipped and supported and financially able to be able to process on site, or be able to process at least a little closer to home. Because just like anything else, we just don't want our food traveling a long ways. Let's have it be in its original source and then be on our plate with as few steps in between as we possibly can. Every single time any food is touched by anybody, every time it increases the risk of pathogens. So let's remove that as much as possible.
I want to talk about the idea of processing animals, because I have a personal issue with transformational speak that obfuscates the fact of what is happening. These animals are being slaughtered, and they are being butchered to process them so that they can be eaten. And I think it's really important for people that eat animals to be alert to the source that these were living creatures. And if you can reconcile that, and if these creatures were given lives or lived lives that were healthy and good lives, and you can feel comfortable with knowing that they gave themselves for your sustenance, great. And one of the things in regenerative farming is that these living creatures are treated humanely and are given good lives. And I'd like you to address that. And I'd also like you to address that in the context of your curriculum, just to have people see what might be possible with an education.
Right. So I'll give an example. On my farm, I raised chickens for eggs, and I raised chickens for meat. And so they were housed a little bit differently, but still the same concept. They were moved throughout the pasture for multiple reasons. You want to rotationally graze animals because you don't want them, well, especially a chicken, you don't want them pecking in their own feces. And then also they are naturally fertilizing the ground. So the more you move them, and then the more that you come back around to that area that they were once at, it's going to be more fertile the next time. So more food for them, and you can potentially, depending on the animal, increase stock density. And there's lots of benefits for everyone. But when I talk about the chickens, I, for instance, had a group of parents that had preschool children, and they were coming to the farm for a visit. And we were getting ready to go to the meat chicken section of the pasture. And I explained what we were about ready to see. And a mom said to me, "Wait, did you just say meat chickens?" And I said, "Yes, that's what that section is for." And she said, "Oh, hold on a minute." And she grabbed her daughter real quick and said, I don't think we can go." And I said, "Okay, do you eat chicken?" And she said, "Yes, multiple times a week." Okay, so let me explain. This is how we raise our chickens, and they get access to new bugs because they are omnivores, and they should be eating worms and all kinds of bugs they find in the ground, and they should be on grass, and ours are, and you'll come see that that's how it works. And they're given plenty of shelter and water and taken care of well. And I would ask that you just maybe research what the alternative is. where your source of chicken is coming from, because chances are they probably are not living the same type of life. And she looked at her daughter and thought, wow, I just never really thought about where my food came from before. We are going to go have a wake-up call. And she took her daughter over to the chickens, and she actually explained that that chicken was living on the ground right there, and that it happened to be the next day was processing day. And she told her daughter, and tomorrow they're going to go and they're going to turn into chicken that we're going to put into our freezer, to eat. And we're going to be buying our chicken from Farmer Amy because we want to be able to eat chicken like this from here on out. I do explain, depending on the age in the curriculum, because the curriculum is developmentally created for certain age groups, I do explain the alternative, and that chickens are often in enclosed environments, sometimes in small cages, and it would not be a place where I would want to source my food from.
Well, let's be a little bit more explicit.
So, for instance, there are cases where the cages are stacked right on top of each other. And these cages are only about the size of the chicken. They can't really move around. Imagine a chicken is probably shedding feces onto the chicken below them, I would not want to eat my food from chickens that were dirty and not cared for and not given access to land. Most of the time when that's the case, they are inside a facility and they've never seen the light of day. When you are buying, for instance, I tell people all the time about eggs. Let's talk about eggs. When you go and you see your choices of eggs, there are so many. How do people even know what they're supposed to buy? And I like to encourage people, buy from pasture-raised eggs. Buy pasture-raised eggs. You're going to get what you are looking for when you do that. Anything else you don't know, because if it says cage-free, that could be a barn that may or may not have a window open that lets light or air in. And there's just thousands of chickens running around on the floor with the ammonia smells so toxic that the farmers themselves have to go in with masks over their faces so that they can breathe. And that doesn't sound like a good source of where to get my food from. I think that if people knew that there were these practices going on, they maybe would think differently about how they buy their food. But how do they learn about that? Most of the time, if you ask to go take tours of those facilities, they will not let you in. So a regenerative farmer that's being transparent and saying, yes, come to my farm. I want to show you how I farm. Get to know how food is raised. Then I am encouraged to think that when communities are allowed to come into those transparent situations, they will create relationships with those farmers, become their customers, and eat healthy food. That feels like a win-win-win to me.
And also really be connected to the cycle of life.
Right, that too.
When you think about factory farming, it's horrific torture for the animals, the way that they are raised. And they often clip the beaks of chickens, and it's a wake-up call, as you said, to become alert to how we have treated other life forms, and then to consume them, treating life as a commodity. Mm-hmm. And this is actually part of the bigger picture, and the new paradigm that we need to be looking at is having a deeper reverence for the cycle of life.
Right. And we can do that if we all stopped eating meat completely. That actually would not be good for the planet. We would be overrun by animals. We are a part of the system. The thing is, we should be eating less meat. We should be eating a plant-rich diet. And the reason why is because we have to think back to one of the big components of regenerative agriculture is using how the buffaloes roam, and how they would clump in a herd, and they would eat where they needed to, and then they would move on, and they would leave behind, their feces, and then it would fertilize, and they would they would just naturally follow a progression and then come back around. So if we are going to be a part of this, because humans are part of the cycle of life, then we need to remember, we need to model after what nature already knew how to do. And that's by taking our cattle and our goats and whatever our animals are that we are going to eat, and mimic that as much as possible, so that it keeps everything sustaining how it's supposed to.
I don't know that we'd be overrun by animals necessarily, because so many of the animals that we eat, we breed for eating. But that's another topic for another conversation.
Well, I am just thinking, when we take predators out of a situation, what happens. For instance, I lived in an area where there were no predators for the deer, and the deer were so abundant that they were a nuisance. And so I'm just thinking of how we just really disrupt the cycle of life, and we have to remember that we are a part of it. This is where I think environmentalists that are really, really extreme, sometimes, leave no trace is a really good thing for us to remember, right? We've been hearing leave no trace for a really long time. And it is, we should be leaving nature as much as possible, but not so much that we just avoid being in it.
Right.
We are a part of it. So I think that there needs to be a balance there.
And actually, that's a brilliant perception, is we are a part of nature. We haven't figured out how to play that part. Traditional cultures did, but as a modern culture, we kind of lost our connection, and now we get to rediscover how to cultivate that again.
Right. One of my goals, my personal and professional goals, is I really want to connect on a deep level with Indigenous communities who have never been confused about what needs to happen. It has been a way of life. We have not honored that. They can be our best teachers, and the people who, in my opinion, children can look up to as heroes, because they know how to focus on nature being our guide. And to me, I hope that that's something that can really be incorporated into Fearless Farmers as the years go on. It isn't my background, so I'm learning too, but the more I connect with people, I want to bring those connections to the families.
Beautiful. So, Amy, besides the curriculum that you offer, you also have some other programs. Let's just talk about how the program, the curriculum is accessible. One of the things you said with Fearless Farmers is that you're partnering with Regenerative Farms.
Right.
So how does that work?
So we are reaching out and hope that as this grows, then farms find out about us and reach out to us, reaching out to Regenerative Farms who would like to be host sites. And the way that works is, we have a board of directors, and the approvals need to go through the board, but throughout the process, we are meeting with these regenerative farmers on their sites to see if it's a good fit. The good fit for us is it's safe, it fits regenerative farming definitions, but when I talk about regenerative farming definitions, it's so broad, and not everybody does the same thing. But you can tell if there's a farmer that is farming regeneratively or aiming to, then we want to support that and bring community around them. So we do farm visits to check to see if it's a good fit. And then we find out from them how they want to be involved. For instance, I'm visiting a farm tomorrow, and they will be offering our 9-week-long series for homeschool families. And so 1 day a week for 9 weeks in the fall, and then again in the spring. And we just keep doing that every fall and spring. Homeschool families can sign up and participate to come 1 day a week to that farm. And the curriculum that we have available is customized to fit their production. And so that farm might not have, let's say they didn't have chickens, then I wouldn't include hands-on chicken activities, but chickens would still be taught in the curriculum. But the things that were hands-on, then we would incorporate those in person on those sites. So as this grows, we're starting in Central Texas. I hope to expand throughout the state. I already have other states that are very interested in us getting on board. And like I mentioned earlier, some global farms are really excited to get started too. So I see the potential of this growing.
So if people want to get involved with you, with actually helping to promote this, and maybe they have a farm, maybe they want to be helping you in their state, how can they do that?
So we have applications on our websites that I mentioned earlier, so fearlessfarmers.org or hillsandmilkandhoney.com. I can be reached either way. And these applications basically just ask basic questions like, what's your involvement? Are you a farmer? Are you interested in joining us? My goal initially was really to promote farmers on the Hills and Milk and Honey site so that people could connect to farmers in their area. And then a funny thing happened, the pandemic hit, and farmers started selling out of everything they had. They didn't need market. Everyone found out where they were and knew how to support them, and that's exciting. I still think that people should get to know who their regenerative farmers are. So I do hope that that can grow. But for right now, I just think that people being able to learn on site at these regenerative farms means that they'll then become customers of those farmers too.
And you also have a summer camp program?
So we are building a summer camp program. If all goes well, that will launch here pretty soon so that we can run it this summer. And if not, then we will run it the following summer. And this idea is that it would be online. This one, at least right now, wouldn't be in person, but it would be live interaction via Zoom calls on a regular basis, and children would be able to learn as a family or just individually. And at the end, they'd be able to receive a certificate that they've completed the intro Learn to Farm course, basically.
And I want to just say, for people that are watching this, we're recording this now in May of 2020. Yes. So relative to that, you'll know whether this exists or doesn't.
Right, exactly.
And your online courses, it was so far your curriculum is for kids primarily. Mm-hmm. I know that there are adults like myself clamoring for this information. Do you have plans to be able to create an adult curriculum as well?
I do. I actually, out of an abundance of calls and emails requesting that I do just that, I've created a 6-series program, and we are getting ready to implement that on sites as well as online. And so adults can look for that coming soon too.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And is there any question I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, Amy?
I can't think of anything. Thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Oh, this has been such a treat. I'm so excited, and I want to explore what we might be able to do together in the future. I'm wondering if you have, besides your curriculum, any books or references that you could recommend to folks.
Yes, I actually do. Let me get
We love that. We're going to list all of these on our website.
Okay. So this one actually comes from Scandinavia. Richard Perkins put together this book called Regenerative Agriculture. It actually just came out this year, and it's thick, and the reviews are amazing, and they're worthy. This is a book where if you are thinking about starting a regenerative farm, I can't think of anything that you would walk away from this book not knowing. This is great. This is also a really good reference point if someone is financially wanting to help support a farmer or help support programs that develop farmers. Go learn about regenerative agriculture. This is a great source to see how this works. And then the other thing I want to mention is when I talked about Alan Savory and holistic management, he has incredible programs to teach. There also is Holistic Management International, which he was originally a part of, and now he has the Savory Institute. Both teach holistic grazing and rotational cropping and no-tilling and all of those aspects. But what I think is really great for people to understand with holistic management is that you are looking at life as a whole and thinking about how you're going to have a holistic goal. And then you break it down into parts, knowing that every single part that touches you is also touching something else. And so you have to think about the reactions that take place in between each of those decisions. And it's really a decision-making framework about how you handle the land. And it comes in really handy to help with relationships and businesses and all kinds of things too. So I encourage people to there are so many resources, but those are my top two recommendations right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll have links to those books on the website at sustainabilitynow.global. And what you're really talking to is the massive paradigm shift from the notion of a mechanistic universe to the notion of a holistic universe.
Right.
And I think that COVID has given us a gift of seeing how interconnected we all are.
I agree. And that's why I'm encouraged, not scared. We have something incredible that's about ready to just burst forth, and I can't wait for people to be a part of it.
And on that note, I want to say thank you again so much for being here. And thank you to all our listeners. It's you who make the difference. So be in touch with your institutions and your representatives, and let's get regenerative agriculture programs put into our schools, and let's make it mainstream. Let's make it the new norm. And a big thank you to my co-founder and our producer, Scott Billy. And that's it for today. I'm your host, Mira Rubin. And until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can change the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.